Thanksgiving dinner should have been about family, not betrayal. But the moment my father set down the carving knife, he looked straight at me and said, "We're selling Carter builders, and Isabella, you're getting nothing." The table went silent. My brother smirked. My sister raised her glass. They thought I was the invisible one, the quiet daughter who never cared about the family business. What they didn't know was that Horizon Ventures, the company buying Carter builders, wasn't some stranger from Phoenix. It was me. And tonight, the truth would break this table wide open. The Carter dining room had always been the kind of place that looked like it belonged in a glossy magazine spread. Mahogany table polished to a deep glow, crystal glasses that caught the light from the chandelier, silver cutlery lined up with military precision. Thanksgiving here was a tradition. The smell of rosemary turkey, buttery mashed potatoes, and sweet pumpkin pie usually set the tone for warmth and family unity. But that year, there was something under the surface. Maybe it was the way my father's shoulders were squared tighter than usual, or how my mother kept glancing at him like she was bracing for something. Ethan and Vanessa were too busy sipping wine and checking their phones to notice. I, on the other hand, felt it. The quiet tension threaded through the air like a live wire. Dinner began the way it always did. Polite small talk, clinking glasses, passing dishes. My father carved the turkey with the same practiced precision he'd used for years, a ritual as much about tradition as it was about control. But when he set down the carving knife, his voice cut sharper than any blade. "I have some news," Rick began, standing at the head of the table. His deep voice silenced the room instantly. "This will be the last Thanksgiving where Carter Builders belongs to this family." Ethan looked up, fork halfway to his mouth. "What are you talking about?" Rick's gaze didn't waver. "I've decided to sell the company." The words dropped like a stone into a still pond. For a second, no one moved. Then Vanessa laughed softly, the kind of nervous laugh you give when you think someone's joking. "You mean, you're stepping back and letting us take over?" she asked, leaning forward as if she already saw herself in the CEO chair. Rick's expression hardened. "No, I mean exactly what I said. Carter Builders will be sold to new ownership." Ethan blinked, his voice rising. "That's insane. This company is our legacy. It's what we've all been working toward." Rick set his hands firmly on the table. "Ethan, you've been working in tech marketing for 5 years. Vanessa, you've been freelancing as a graphic designer. Neither of you has ever shown any real interest in construction or business operations." "That's not fair," Vanessa snapped. "We can learn. We can bring fresh ideas." Rick cut her off, his tone sharp. "Vanessa, you've never stepped foot on a construction site. You don't know the difference between a load-bearing wall and a partition. Business management isn't posting pretty pictures on social media. It's about knowing the work, the risks, the people. Neither of you has put in the time to earn this responsibility." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Dad, we're your children. We deserve to inherit what you built." Rick leaned back in his chair, his voice cold but steady. "Inheritance is earned, not given. And neither of you has earned the right to run Carter Builders." The air in the room shifted. Vanessa's face flushed with disbelief. Ethan's brows pulled together in a deep scowl. "And me?" I sat at the far end of the table, just where I always sat. Quiet, still, unnoticed. My wine glass was still full, my plate untouched. No one looked at me. No one asked for my thoughts. They never did. I'd spent years being the quiet one, the one who didn't make waves, the one they assumed wasn't part of these conversations. Tonight was no different. Rick's focus was entirely on Ethan and Vanessa, as though the idea of my involvement never even crossed his mind. His words sliced through the room again, leaving no room for argument. "This company is my life's work," he said, voice firm, "and I will not see 30 years of effort handed over to people who only see it as a paycheck. It will be sold to someone who will protect what I built." Ethan opened his mouth to argue again, but Mom placed a hand on his arm, a subtle signal to stop. Vanessa's lips pressed into a thin line, her knuckles white around her wine glass. Across the table, I caught the faintest flicker of satisfaction in Rick's eyes. Not cruelty, just conviction. He believed he was doing the right thing. The thing was, so did I, just not for the same reasons. I lowered my gaze to my plate, letting the conversation roll past me. Let them think I wasn't a part of this. Let them believe I was invisible. Because the less they saw me now, the bigger the shock would be later. Rick let the silence linger for just a moment longer, as if daring anyone to challenge him. Then, with the same deliberate calm he'd used to drop the first bomb, he continued, "The buyer is a firm called Horizon Ventures," he said, his voice low but steady. "They're based in Phoenix, reputable, experienced. They specialize in acquiring strong regional contractors and expanding them into bigger markets." Ethan's head snapped up. "Horizon Ventures? I've heard of them. They're huge. That's actually incredible, Dad." Vanessa leaned forward, her earlier indignation dissolving into sudden calculation. "So they're paying well for the company?" Rick's lips curved slightly. $40 million. Ethan let out a low whistle. $40 million? Wow. Dad, that's life-changing. Across the table, Vanessa's expression shifted. Her eyes darted briefly toward Ethan, the unspoken thought between them as clear as the crystal glasses in front of us. That's our inheritance. Rick seemed to sense it too, because his voice sharpened, though he still wore that calm, businesslike mask. "Your mother and I will be using the proceeds to fund our retirement." Ethan blinked. "Right, of course, but I mean, after that, obviously you'll—" "No." Rick's tone was final, leaving no room for misunderstanding. "Your mother and I intend to enjoy our retirement while we still have the health and time to do so. We're buying a home in Scottsdale, taking that river cruise through Europe we've always talked about. The money will support us comfortably for the rest of our lives." Vanessa's smile faltered. "So, none of it will be passed down?" Rick's gaze swept the table. "I'm leaving you what my father left me. The opportunity to make your own way in the world. When I started Carter Builders, I had $5,000 in savings and a used pickup truck. That's more than enough foundation for any of you to build something for yourselves." The weight of his words settled over the table like a cold draft. Ethan's face darkened. Vanessa's jaw clenched. From my spot at the far end, I kept my expression carefully neutral. This was the moment where most people would argue, plead, or lash out, but I had no need. The plan was already in motion, the pieces already moving exactly as I'd set them. Ethan broke the silence first. "Dad, we're talking about our family business here. Our name, our legacy. You're just going to hand it over to strangers?" Rick's voice didn't waver. "I'm handing it over to people who will respect it. Horizon Ventures has the resources, the expertise, and the track record to ensure Carter Builders thrives long after I'm gone." Vanessa leaned back, her eyes narrowing. "And what happens to us? After everything we've done?" Rick's brow furrowed, and for a fleeting moment I thought he might laugh. "Everything you've done? Vanessa, you've built a freelance design portfolio. Ethan, you've managed marketing campaigns for a tech startup. Neither of you has put in the time or work to earn a stake in Carter Builders. I will not gamble 30 years of effort on entitlement." Ethan's mouth opened, but nothing came out. I took a sip of my wine, the rich Cabernet smooth on my tongue. Inside, my pulse was steady. I'd sat through years of these conversations, always an observer, never a participant, and that was fine. It was better this way. Rick straightened, clearly ready to move on. "Dinner's getting cold. We'll finalize the transition in the coming weeks. Until then, I don't want arguments. The decision is made." Vanessa stared down at her plate, her fork unmoving. Ethan leaned back, shoulders tense, eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the chandelier. "And me?" I cut into my turkey, as calm as if we'd just discussed the weather. Because while the rest of the table saw an ending, I knew better. This wasn't the end of Carter Builders. It was the beginning of the biggest reveal they'd ever witnessed. I could almost hear the clinking of old tools and the smell of sawdust in my memory. Carter Builders wasn't just a business. It was the backdrop of my entire childhood. When I was 8, My Saturdays weren't spent at dance class or birthday parties. They were spent trailing my father through half-finished houses, my sneakers crunching over stray nails, my hands gripping the edge of his heavy leather tool belt. At first, Dad seemed amused by my eagerness. He'd let me hold the measuring tape or scribble numbers on his blueprints, but the novelty wore off quickly. One afternoon, I had just finished carefully marking a set of studs for a wall frame when Rick chuckled to one of the foremen. "She's got spirit, but you know how it is. Construction isn't really for girls." They laughed. I laughed too, pretending it didn't sting. But I remember the way my cheeks burned, my hands curling into fists inside my hoodie pocket. It wasn't just that moment. It was dozens of them. I kept showing up. Every weekend, every school holiday, I was there. But every time I tried to do more than pass him a tool or sweep up sawdust, I'd get the same refrain. "Careful, that's too heavy for you. Sweetheart, you don't want to ruin your clothes. This isn't a place for you to be getting dirty." And slowly, my place at the job site shifted from helping to just watching. Meanwhile, Ethan would drop by once in a blue moon, usually when Dad had a client coming through. He'd shake hands, charm them with some line about taking over the family legacy someday, and Dad would beam like he'd just handed him a golden crown. Vanessa? She was even less involved. She'd show up at company holiday parties, dressed like a magazine cover, and Dad would introduce her as my creative one, as if her mere presence was a strategic asset. Neither of them spent hours inhaling sawdust. Neither of them stayed late to watch the foreman troubleshoot a beam installation. But they were still talked about like heirs in waiting. Me. I was the shadow at the edge of the frame. When I turned 14, I asked Dad if I could work in the office over the summer, help with invoices, shadow the project managers, anything. He patted my shoulder. "That's sweet, Isabella, but we don't have time to babysit in the office. Go enjoy your summer." That same week, Ethan got to sit in on a bid meeting because, as Dad put it, it's good experience for when he's running things someday. By high school, I'd stopped asking. I still loved the company, still loved the smell of fresh-cut lumber and the satisfying click of a perfectly aligned joint. But I learned to keep my curiosity to myself. When Dad introduced us at business dinners, he'd talk about Ethan's leadership potential, Vanessa's creative vision. And me? "This is Isabella. She's smart, good with numbers," he'd say, with a smile that always felt smaller. I got used to nodding along, smiling politely, as if I agreed with the roles we'd all been assigned. I wasn't angry, not then, just patient. Because even as I stood in the shadows, I was watching. I watched Ethan stumble through conversations about procurement and scheduling because he didn't know the terminology. I watched Vanessa suggest branding updates that had nothing to do with contracts, regulations, or cost controls. And I watched Dad shoulder everything, never questioning whether the people he was grooming could actually handle the weight. I kept sweeping floors, carrying blueprints, listening quietly at the edges of conversations. No one noticed me taking notes. No one asked what I was learning, and that was fine, because being underestimated was its own kind of advantage. When it came time for college applications, I didn't choose construction management. I didn't pick architecture. I didn't even look at civil engineering programs. I chose finance, not because I'd given up on Carter Builders, but because I understood what my father never seemed to see. The company's strength wasn't just in bricks, beams, and blueprints. It was in contracts, balance sheets, and cash flow. I thought maybe, just maybe, if I mastered the part of the business no one else cared about, I could make myself indispensable. When I told my family, I still remember the exact expression on Dad's face. He smiled, but it wasn't pride. It was the kind of polite smile you give when someone has chosen the sneaky path. "Finance? Well, at least you'll have a steady job," he said, as though I'd just confessed to settling for mediocrity. Ethan didn't bother hiding his smirk. "Guess you're officially running away from the hard work, huh?" Vanessa raised her wine glass. "Numbers are safer than construction dust, I guess. Smart move." They didn't see the strategy. They saw an exit. In their eyes, I wasn't stepping sideways to strengthen my position. I was stepping out of the family legacy entirely, and the label stuck. At every family gathering after that, my role became smaller. At Thanksgiving, Dad would talk about Ethan's latest project pitches, none of which ever materialized beyond his laptop screen. Vanessa would share her design commissions, complete with a slideshow on her tablet. When conversation turned to me, it was always the same. "Isabella's still in finance," Dad would say, before quickly moving on. It didn't matter that I'd graduated top of my class, that I'd been recruited by one of the most competitive investment firms in the Southwest, that I'd started specializing in corporate acquisitions. To them, I was just the one who did numbers. At my cousin's wedding, Uncle Henry clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Guess you're the one who keeps everyone's checkbooks balanced, huh?" At my father's 65th birthday, Vanessa made a toast. To Dad, may your legacy live on in Carter Builders. And to Isabella, may your spreadsheets always balance. Everyone laughed. I laughed too. But inside, I felt that familiar warmth in my chest. Not anger, just fuel. Every joke, every dismissive comment, every time my name came up as a punchline instead of a player, it all went into the same quiet vault. I let them think I'd chosen an easy path. I let them believe I'd traded in construction dust for the comfort of an air-conditioned office. Because the less they saw me as a threat, the freer I was to build something real, without the weight of their expectations or interference. At those dinners, I became an expert in silence. When Ethan boasted about someday running Carter Builders, I sipped my wine and didn't point out that he still couldn't read a P&L statement. When Vanessa floated ideas about rebranding the company logo in pastel colors, I smiled and didn't mention how she'd never seen a client contract. And when Dad nodded along, still convinced they were the future of the company, I simply folded my napkin neatly in my lap and said nothing. Because I knew the truth. The future wasn't being built at that table. It was being built quietly, in the spaces they didn't bother to look. Leaving Texas didn't feel like running away. It felt like moving a chess piece into position. I told my family I was taking a job offer in Phoenix. Better pay, better benefits, a smart move for someone in finance. They nodded, politely supportive, but inwardly certain I was disappearing into obscurity. That was fine. What I didn't tell them was that Phoenix wasn't just a career move. It was a strategy. Arizona's construction market was booming. Every month brought new developments, commercial towers, mixed-use complexes, luxury condos. Money was pouring in, and the companies making it happen were scaling fast. I started small. My first year in Phoenix, I worked as a financial analyst for a mid-size investment group. I kept my head down, built relationships, learned how deals were structured. I studied not just numbers, but people. The CEOs who grew companies from scratch, the contractors who built reputations on quality and deadlines, the investors who spotted value before anyone else saw it. After 2 years, I left to launch my own venture. Horizon Ventures started in a rented office barely bigger than my college apartment. Just me, a desk, and a vision I didn't bother explaining to anyone back home. The first acquisition was modest. A small commercial renovation firm struggling with debt, but rich in client relationships. I bought them out, cleared their liabilities, and kept their core team intact. Then came a boutique construction company specializing in luxury retail build-outs. Then a roofing subcontractor with a spotless safety record. Then a small architectural consultancy. Every deal was deliberate. Every acquisition added not just revenue, but capability. I wasn't just building a portfolio, I was building an ecosystem. Within 5 years, Horizon Ventures wasn't just a holding company, it was a network. I had project managers who could run a multi-site rollout without flinching, architects who could pivot from high-end residential to complex mixed use, operations teams who knew how to integrate systems, vendors, and crews like clockwork. And because I'd been in finance, I knew how to structure it all for scale. I didn't flaunt it. There were no splashy press releases, no interviews, no social media bragging. Most of our deals flew under the radar, deliberately quiet. From the outside, I was still just Isabella, the one who does finance somewhere out west. But in my world, Horizon Ventures had assets in 8 states, partnerships with some of the largest developers in the Southwest, and a reputation for turning underperforming companies into market leaders. Every success was another brick in the foundation I was laying, and through it all, I kept Carter Builders in my peripheral vision. I watched from afar as my father continued to run things his way. I saw Ethan dabble in half-hearted marketing pitches that never went anywhere. Vanessa posted endless mood boards on social media, none of which ever translated into contracts. The company was steady but vulnerable. It had no succession plan, no growth strategy, and a leader inching toward retirement. I didn't push. I didn't call with advice. I didn't offer help, because I knew timing was everything. And when the time came, I wanted to be ready, not as the overlooked daughter asking for a seat at the table, but as the buyer offering a deal too smart to refuse. By year 6, Horizon Ventures had outgrown its cramped office. We'd moved into a sleek, glass-walled suite downtown, the kind of space where developers and investors felt at home closing multi-million-dollar deals. Our portfolio spanned the region: a medical complex in Scottsdale, a mixed-use development in Albuquerque, high-end retail projects in Las Vegas, and a residential tower in Denver. We weren't just competing, we were setting the standard. The name Horizon Ventures was quietly circulating in boardrooms and industry dinners. Developers called us when they needed a partner who could deliver. Lenders called us when they wanted a safe bet. And contractors called us because we kept our promises and paid on time. Still, outside the industry, I was invisible, exactly as I wanted. That's why the email from my HR director caught my attention one afternoon. Subject: Candidate, Ethan Carter. I opened it slowly, reading the brief summary. My brother had applied for a marketing position with one of our subsidiaries, a mid-size construction services company we'd acquired 18 months earlier. His resume was polished, the kind of generic corporate profile you could copy-paste for any mid-level applicant. There was no mention of Carter Builders, no hint of family ties. He had no idea whose desk his application would cross. I stared at the screen for a long time. Ethan never got an interview. It wasn't because of me. The hiring manager passed on him after reviewing his portfolio. His experience was too shallow, his results inconsistent. He was just another name in a stack of applicants who didn't make the cut. I never mentioned it to him. When I saw him at Christmas that year, he complained about the ridiculous competition in the industry, blaming the economy, the market, anything but his own lack of preparation. I smiled, nodded, and let him talk. Some truths were better left unspoken, at least for now. By year 8, Horizon Ventures had crossed the $300 million mark in assets under management. Our operations were lean, our acquisitions strategic, and that's when Carter Builders reappeared on my radar. I'd kept an eye on the company for years, tracking their projects, their contracts, their leadership moves, or lack thereof. Rick was still at the helm, still doing things the same way he always had. Steady, but stagnant. Then I heard the first whisper. Through a contact in Dallas, I learned my father had been in informal talks with potential buyers. Nothing serious yet, but he was testing the waters. I didn't react. Instead, I began assembling a quiet analysis. I pulled Carter Builders' public financials, reviewed their project pipeline, assessed their competitive positioning. The company was still solid, still respected, but its value would plateau without a succession plan. That was my opening. I called a meeting with my executive team. We discussed acquisition scenarios, risk mitigation, and integration strategies. The conclusion was unanimous. Carter Builders was a perfect fit for Horizon Ventures' expansion into Texas. But I didn't tell anyone in my family. Just like I hadn't told Ethan about his failed application. Just like I hadn't told Vanessa about the subcontractor she'd pitched design work to. A subcontractor we also owned. Some moves were better played in silence. The offer would come from Horizon Ventures, as any smart acquisition offer would. Structured, well-funded, and backed by a reputation my family couldn't dismiss. By the time Dad was ready to sell, I would be ready to buy. And for the first time, Carter Builders would be in the hands of someone who knew its foundation from the inside out. The clinking of silverware had stopped. The hum of conversation that usually filled our Thanksgiving dinners had been replaced by sharp, jagged words volleyed across the table. Ethan was leaning forward, his voice strained. "Dad, this doesn't make sense. You built Carter Builders from the ground up. Why would you hand it over to some outside firm?" Vanessa was nodding vigorously, her wine glass forgotten. "Exactly. This isn't just a business, it's our name. We should be the ones taking it forward, not some strangers." Rick sat back in his chair, the picture of calm authority. "Strangers? Hardly. Horizon Ventures has a reputation for integrity and performance. I've looked at their record. They take care of the companies they acquire. They grow them." Ethan scoffed. "And you just take their word for it? You're ready to trust everything you've built to someone you've never even met in person?" Rick's jaw tightened, a faint edge creeping into his voice. "I've met their team. I've reviewed their contracts, spoken to their partners, checked their financials. This is not a casual deal, Ethan. I don't make decisions without due diligence." Vanessa leaned back, her arms crossed. "Still, it just feels wrong. You've always said Carter Builders was a family legacy. Now you're just selling it off like it's nothing." Rick's eyes sharpened. "It is not nothing. It's 30 years of hard work, and I won't see it dismantled because of sentimentality. The truth is, neither of you has shown any interest in running this company, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise." The air in the room thickened. I sat quietly, my fork resting on the edge of my plate. My eyes moved between them, watching the way Rick's patience was fraying at the edges, the way Ethan and Vanessa were fighting more from pride than any real plan. It was almost too easy. When there was a brief lull in the argument, I spoke for the first time in what felt like an hour. My tone was mild, almost curious. "Dad, you said the buyer was Horizon Ventures?" 3 sets of eyes turned toward me, surprised, as if they'd forgotten I was even there. Rick's expression softened a little. "That's right, they're based out of Phoenix. I've done my research. They're reputable, well-capitalized, and have a strong track record in acquisitions." I nodded, letting my gaze drop to my glass. "And you're confident they'll take care of Carter Builders?" His voice took on a note of pride, the kind he reserved for moments when he wanted everyone to see just how thoroughly he'd done his homework. "Absolutely. They've committed to preserving our workforce, maintaining quality standards, and investing in growth. This isn't a strip-and-flip operation. It's the best possible future for the company." Vanessa leaned in, trying to reclaim ground. "And what about the family name? Do they even care about that?" Rick gave a small, almost indulgent smile. "The name will remain. They understand the value of our reputation in the Texas market. That's part of what they're paying for." Ethan shook his head. "I still don't get it. You trust them, but you won't trust us? We're your own kids." Rick's patience snapped, just for a moment. "Trust is earned. Horizon Ventures has earned it. You haven't." The words landed heavy, silencing the table. I took another sip of wine, letting the moment breathe. Rick's confidence in Horizon Ventures was unshakable. He thought he'd found the perfect buyer, and in a way, he had, just not in the way he imagined. I set my glass down slowly, the faint clink drawing all eyes back to me. "Dad," I began softly, "you keep saying you've done your research on Horizon Ventures. Did you ever ask who owns it?" Rick blinked at me, clearly caught off guard. "It's a private firm, Isabella. The owner isn't the point. What matters is their track record, their resources." I leaned forward slightly, my voice calm but clear. "The owner is the point, because it's me." Silence. The kind of silence that doesn't just fall, it drops. Ethan's brows shot up so fast I thought they might disappear into his hairline. Vanessa froze, with her fork halfway to her mouth. Rick stared at me, confusion etched across his face. "What are you talking about?" "I own Horizon Ventures," I said, my tone steady. "I founded it 8 years ago. I'm the one who made the offer for Carter Builders." Vanessa gave a short, incredulous laugh. "That's not funny, Isabella." Ethan smirked, leaning back in his chair. "Right, sure. And I'm the CEO of Microsoft. You expect us to believe you're running some massive construction investment firm? You've been doing What, balancing spreadsheets in Arizona? I didn't bother looking at him. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out a slim black folder, sliding it across the table toward Rick. Inside were the preliminary purchase agreements, Horizon Ventures letterhead at the top, my signature at the bottom as managing partner and CEO. Rick opened the folder slowly. His eyes scanned the page, then flicked up to me, his expression shifting from disbelief to something heavier. Ethan was still chuckling under his breath. "This is rich. So what, you're just some figurehead? A name on paper while the real players—" I cut him off without raising my voice. "Do you remember that medical complex in Scottsdale that made Architectural Digest last year?" Ethan frowned. "What does that have to do with anything?" I slid a glossy project photo across the table. "Horizon Ventures built it." Vanessa's eyes widened slightly, but she still shook her head. "That doesn't prove—" "What about the mixed-use development in Tempe that won the Sustainability Award?" I added, placing another photo beside the first. "Or the retail expansion in Las Vegas that brought in $80 million in revenue last quarter?" Ethan's smirk faded. Vanessa's fork clinked softly against her plate. I leaned back, giving them space to take it in. Rick's hands were still on the folder, his thumb resting over my signature. His voice was quieter now, but there was a trace of awe in it. "Isabella, you founded this company?" "Yes," I said simply. "I built it piece by piece, deal by deal. While you thought I was just working in finance, I was acquiring companies, expanding markets, building a team that could take on projects bigger than anything Carter Builders has ever touched. And now, I'm buying yours." Vanessa looked stunned. Ethan just stared at me, jaw tight, the weight of the truth finally cracking his sarcasm. For years, they'd laughed at me for being the quiet one, the one who did numbers. They'd assumed silence meant weakness. Tonight, silence had turned into the sharpest weapon I could wield. Rick closed the folder slowly, his gaze fixed on me. The disbelief was gone, replaced by something far rarer, respect. And across the table, my siblings sat in stunned silence, finally realizing the invisible sister they'd dismissed for years had just outplayed them all. The room still felt charged, as if the air itself had shifted. Rick's eyes stayed locked on me, his usual impenetrable expression cracked open with something rare, curiosity. "Why?" he asked finally. His voice wasn't sharp, wasn't suspicious, just searching. "Why would you pay full market value for Carter Builders? You could have told me who you were and we could have worked something out between us." I took a breath, steady and measured. "Because I don't want a deal based on family obligation. I want this to be a deal that stands on merit." Rick frowned, not out of disapproval, but thought. I could almost see the wheels turning in his mind. "I built Horizon Ventures the same way you built Carter Builders," I continued, "from nothing but determination and long hours. And just like you, I learned that you don't protect a legacy by giving it away. You protect it by putting it in the right hands, even if those hands belong to your own daughter." Vanessa shifted in her seat, her expression tightening. Ethan just stared at the table, still processing. Rick's eyes softened, just slightly. "And you think your hands are the right ones?" "Yes," I said simply. "Not because I'm your daughter, but because I understand this business. I know its strengths, its weaknesses, its potential. And I know that what you've built deserves more than to be picked apart by outsiders looking for a quick profit." He leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving me. For the first time in years, he wasn't looking at me as the quiet child who'd chosen a safe career. He was looking at me like he'd look at a serious business partner. "You could have come to me sooner," he said after a long pause. "I could have," I admitted, "but you weren't ready to hear it. You were still convinced Ethan and Vanessa were the future of Carter Builders. You needed to see this as a business decision, not a family favor." The corners of Rick's mouth lifted. Not a smile exactly, but something close. "You've been planning this for a long time." "Since I was old enough to know what a balance sheet was," I said with a small shrug. There was a ripple of tension around the table. Ethan glanced at Vanessa, both of them suddenly quiet. I could feel the shift, not just in Rick, but in the whole room. For years, my role in this family had been defined by what I wasn't. Not the heir, not the leader, not the one at the center of the legacy. Now, for the first time, that was changing. Rick picked up his wine glass, turning it slowly in his hand. His voice was softer when he spoke again. "You know, Isabella, I never thought I'd say this, but I'm impressed." It wasn't a grand declaration. It wasn't an apology for years of dismissal. But it was real. And in this family, respect wasn't given in speeches. It was given in moments like this. I met his gaze evenly. "I'm not buying Carter Builders to change what you built. I'm buying it to protect it, to make sure it stays strong for decades to come." Rick nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. The others might have missed it, but I saw it, the smallest glimmer of pride in his eyes. For the first time, he wasn't just seeing me as his daughter. He was seeing me as someone who'd earned a place at the table. For a brief moment, it felt like everything was aligning. Rick was no longer looking at me as the quiet daughter who had walked away. Ethan and Vanessa had gone silent, the weight of reality beginning to settle over them. But in business, just like in construction, nothing is final until the deal is signed, sealed, and delivered. 3 days later, I was back in Phoenix, sitting at the long conference table in Horizon Ventures' boardroom. My executive team had gathered to review the final stage of the Carter Builders acquisition. That's when Mark Donovan, one of our most senior board members, cleared his throat. "I have a concern," he said, his voice measured but firm. "A serious one." I set down my pen, bracing myself. Mark wasn't the type to raise objections lightly. "You're buying a company from your own father," he continued, "a family-owned business, with family members still involved. That's a conflict of interest that could raise eyebrows in the industry. It could even be seen as favoritism. This isn't just about the numbers, it's about our reputation." There was a murmur of agreement from the far end of the table. I straightened in my chair. "The acquisition meets all of our investment criteria. Carter Builders has a strong balance sheet, loyal clients, and a solid workforce. This isn't a sentimental purchase. It's a strategic one." Mark leaned back, steepling his fingers. "I don't doubt the numbers, Isabella, but perception matters. If this deal goes wrong, it won't just be Carter Builders' name on the line. It'll be Horizon Ventures. People will say we overpaid to bail out your family, or worse, that we only got the deal because of your last name." I felt the familiar spark of frustration in my chest, but I kept my voice even. "So, what are you proposing?" "That we pause the acquisition," Mark said. "Reevaluate. Make sure there's no appearance of impropriety. We have other opportunities on the table that don't carry this kind of baggage." The words hit like a punch to the gut. Pausing wasn't just a formality. In M&A, a pause could kill a deal. It sent the wrong message, to the seller, to our partners, to the market. For a long moment, I looked around the table, meeting the eyes of each board member. Some looked uneasy, others downright skeptical. I could feel the shift. The momentum we'd built was teetering. "If we back out now," I said slowly, "we lose more than just this deal. We lose credibility. Carter Builders is a textbook acquisition. Strong fundamentals, clear growth potential, minimal integration risk. Walking away because I happen to share DNA with the owner sends a message that we're afraid of optics. And in this industry, fear is blood in the water." There was silence. Mark studied me for a moment, his expression unreadable. "You feel strongly about this?" "Yes," I said. "Strongly enough to put my name and my equity behind it. If this deal fails, I'll take the hit personally. But I won't let Horizon Ventures pass on one of the best opportunities we've seen in years, because someone's worried about gossip." The room was quiet, the kind of silence where decisions are made without words. Finally, Mark gave a small nod, though his tone was still cautious. "Very well, but the board will require additional oversight on the integration phase, and we'll need a formal statement clarifying that the transaction meets all governance standards." I exhaled slowly, a controlled release of tension. Agreed. The deal wasn't dead, but it wasn't safe either. For now, Carter Builders was still in limbo, and with it, the legacy I'd spent years positioning myself to protect. The board's hesitation hadn't just rattled the deal, it had sent a subtle tremor through the family as well. Back in Texas, the news that the acquisition was temporarily stalled had trickled down to Ethan and Vanessa. Suddenly, their outrage over being excluded shifted into something quieter, more calculated. Ethan called me first. His voice was unusually measured, stripped of its usual bravado. "Look, I've been thinking. Maybe I was too quick to get defensive. Maybe Horizon Ventures buying Carter Builders isn't such a bad thing. And maybe there's a way I can be involved. To help with the transition." I could practically hear the gears turning in his head. Not long after, Vanessa reached out too. Over coffee at a downtown cafe, she leaned forward with a carefully neutral expression. "I still think it's strange Dad didn't consider us for leadership," she began, stirring her latte with slow precision. "But I've also been thinking, if Horizon's going to be running Carter Builders, maybe there's a place for me to contribute. My design work could be valuable in branding, client presentations, that sort of thing." I listened to both of them without interruption. On the surface, it sounded like cooperation. Underneath, it was survival instinct. The reality was dawning on them. The deal was happening, with or without their blessing. If they wanted a piece of the future, they'd have to earn it. So I gave them a choice. "I'm willing to bring both of you into Horizon Ventures," I told them plainly, "but not as executives, not as managers. You'll start where everyone else starts. Entry-level positions. You'll learn the business from the ground up." Ethan's brows shot up. "Entry-level? Isabella, I've been working in marketing for years. I have experience." "You have experience in tech marketing," I corrected. "Not in construction, not in acquisitions, not in project management. If you want to work in this industry, you'll learn it the way I did, from the foundation up." Vanessa's lips parted, surprise flickering in her expression. "And what would I even do? File papers? Make coffee?" "You'd work in project coordination," I said. "Client relations, administrative support, maybe safety compliance training. You'd see how projects move from contract to completion, so you understand the business you want to represent." Ethan leaned back in his chair, clearly struggling to process the idea. "So, no special treatment." "No special treatment," I said evenly. "Performance determines advancement, not last names." They were quiet for a moment, both of them chewing over the reality I'd laid out. It wasn't punishment, it was opportunity, but it was also a test. I needed to know whether they were willing to step into the business world as contributors instead of entitled heirs. Vanessa was the first to break the silence. "If that's what it takes, I'll do it." Ethan hesitated, his pride fighting him every step of the way. Finally, he exhaled, his voice low. "Fine, I'll do it too." I nodded once, not letting any emotion show on my face. "Then we'll start making arrangements once the acquisition is finalized. Until then, watch and learn. Horizon doesn't reward talk. It rewards results." Neither of them looked happy, but they looked determined, and for the first time, I saw a glimmer of something in both of them. Maybe humility, maybe ambition, maybe just the fear of being left behind. Either way, it was enough to move forward. For a while, it seemed like the tension had eased. Ethan kept his head down, Vanessa stopped arguing, and Rick was cautiously optimistic about the transition. But in business, calm waters can hide strong currents. 2 weeks after my conversation with Ethan and Vanessa, I got a call from one of my legal advisors in Phoenix. His tone was clipped, professional, but there was an edge to it that caught my attention immediately. "Isabella, we've been contacted by a third-party firm regarding Carter Builders. They've made an unsolicited offer. The timing and the terms are unusual." I asked him to send me the details. Within an hour, I had the documents in front of me. The bidder was a mid-tier construction holding company based in Dallas. Their offer was significantly lower than Horizon's, but still structured in a way that could entice a seller who was worried about deal complications. And then I saw the kicker. Attached to their proposal was a facilitation agreement, signed by none other than Vanessa Carter. The agreement promised that Vanessa would assist in negotiations and smooth transfer of family assets in exchange for a commission if the deal went through. It wasn't just a betrayal, it was reckless. And it was legally questionable. I sat back in my chair, the weight of the betrayal pressing against my chest. For years, Vanessa had played the part of the charming sister, the one who smiled through conflict and kept her claws hidden. Now, with her place in the future uncertain, she'd gone looking for another angle, and she'd chosen the wrong game. I called her that evening. She answered on the second ring, her voice sweet but slightly wary. "Isabella, I wasn't expecting to hear from you tonight." "Cut the small talk," I said evenly. "We need to discuss the facilitation agreement you signed with Caldwell Holdings." There was a pause. "I don't know what you're—" "Don't insult me, Vanessa. I have the signed copy in front of me." Her silence was deafening. "You thought you could undercut Horizon's offer?" I continued. "You thought Dad would take a lower bid just to avoid selling to me?" "It wasn't about avoiding you," she said quickly, but there was a defensive edge in her tone. "It was about protecting myself. You're buying the company outright. Where does that leave me? Where does that leave Ethan? Caldwell promised you a commission," I interrupted, my voice still calm. "Do you even realize that what you signed violates multiple provisions in the sale process? It could jeopardize the entire deal. It could put you at risk legally." Her voice faltered. I didn't think." "No," I said sharply. "You didn't think. You acted. And now you're in over your head." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I gave her a moment, then softened my tone slightly. "Vanessa, I'm not going to press charges. I'm not going to expose this to Dad. But this ends now. Caldwell is out. You're done trying to maneuver behind the scenes." She exhaled shakily. "And if I agree? Then you start at Horizon Ventures in the role I offered you," I said. "No special treatment, no shortcuts. You'll earn your place, or you won't have one at all." There was another long pause. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, stripped of its usual smooth confidence. "Fine, I'll take the position." I could picture her on the other end of the line, composed on the surface but rattled beneath. "This is your only chance, Vanessa," I said. "Don't mistake it for weakness. Horizon doesn't hand out second ones." After we hung up, I forwarded the Caldwell documents to my legal team. The agreement would be quietly nullified, the offer formally declined. No scandal, no public mess. The next time I saw Vanessa was at a follow-up family meeting. She was quieter than usual, her usual charm muted. Ethan didn't seem to know what had happened, but he watched her with a mix of suspicion and curiosity. Rick noticed the change too, but he didn't press. He seemed content to see his oldest daughter showing signs of humility, even if he didn't know the reason. As for me, I kept the details to myself. Sometimes the biggest wins happen behind closed doors, with no audience to applaud. Vanessa had learned her lesson, and the deal was back on track. 6 months can change a company or a family in ways you'd never expect. Carter Builders was no longer the same company Rick had run for 3 decades. Under Horizon Ventures, it was leaner, more strategic, and better positioned for growth. We'd kept the name, the values, and the team that had made it respected. But we'd also modernized operations, streamlined bidding processes, and expanded into commercial markets that had been out of reach before. And the results spoke for themselves. Revenue was up. Client satisfaction was up. Project completion timelines were faster than they had been in years. Carter Builders wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. Ethan, to his credit, had stepped into his role at Horizon Ventures with surprising discipline. I'd started him as a project coordinator just as I promised, entry-level, reporting to a supervisor who didn't care that his last name was Carter. At first, his pride chafed against the reality of answering to people who'd once been below him in the family hierarchy. But over time, something shifted. I saw it the day he stayed late on site, reviewing punch lists and talking through an unexpected materials delay with the crew instead of blaming procurement. I saw it when he took notes during a client meeting instead of trying to dominate the room. He was learning, and for the first time, I thought maybe he was doing it for more than self-preservation. Vanessa's path had been different, but just as revealing. Her position in Horizon Ventures' design team started with skepticism, both from her colleagues and, if she was honest, from herself. But when a large commercial development needed a refreshed branding package to pitch to a major client, she stepped in with a design concept that blended aesthetics with strategic messaging. The client loved it. That one win gave her credibility. Soon she was working directly with project teams, tailoring presentations and materials that spoke not just to the visual identity of a project, but to its market positioning. It wasn't the kind of leadership she'd once imagined for herself, but it was real contribution. And quietly, without fanfare, I could see her beginning to take pride in that. As for Rick, he had finally stepped into retirement, but not the kind that meant disappearing to Scottsdale and checking out completely. After the deal closed, I offered him a formal role as senior advisor to Carter Builders under Horizon Ventures. His duties were part-time, flexible, and entirely focused on what he did best, relationships. He visited job sites, checked in with longtime clients, and occasionally sat in on bid presentations to lend the gravitas only he could provide. And he loved it. He wasn't buried in schedules or stressed over payroll anymore. He wasn't worrying about succession plans or feeling the weight of the entire company on his shoulders. He was free to enjoy the work without being consumed by it. Every time I visited the Texas office, I saw him with that same quiet pride in his eyes, the kind he'd once reserved for completed projects and signed contracts. Only now, it wasn't just about what he'd built. It was about what we were building together. One afternoon, during a visit to the Dallas office, I found him in the conference room reviewing project photos from a recent completion. "You've done well, Isabella," he said, not looking up at first. Then he turned, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Better than I ever expected." I met his gaze evenly. I had a good foundation to build on. He chuckled at that, shaking his head. But I could see it. The pride he didn't put into words often, but that had been growing since the night of that Thanksgiving dinner. It wasn't just pride in the company. It was pride in me, and maybe, in some small way, pride in the way Ethan and Vanessa had begun to find their own footing, too. The Carter family wasn't perfect. We still had our disagreements, our egos, our stubborn streaks, but the constant tension, the old dismissiveness, it had shifted. There was space now for respect, and that was worth more than any inheritance. 6 months after the acquisition, Carter Builders was not just thriving, it was standing at the center of a bigger vision. Horizon Ventures had integrated the company so seamlessly that it wasn't just another acquisition on our books. It had become something more, a cornerstone. The decision had been in motion for weeks, but I hadn't shared it outside the executive team. It wasn't just a strategic move, it was personal. We were hosting the first annual Carter Builders Appreciation Gala under Horizon Ventures, a celebration of both the company's legacy and its future. The venue was the same country club where Dad had signed some of his biggest deals decades earlier. The ballroom glowed with warm lighting. Banners with the Carter Builders logo hung alongside Horizon Ventures branding. The guest list was a mix of longtime employees, new Horizon leadership, and clients who'd been with us for years. Rick stood near the front, shaking hands, laughing with old colleagues. Ethan and Vanessa circulated the room, more comfortable now in their new roles than I'd ever seen them before. When it was my turn to take the podium, I glanced toward my family. They weren't watching me with skepticism or polite tolerance. Tonight, their eyes held something else entirely: expectation. "Good evening," I began, my voice carrying through the room. 6 months ago, Carter Builders joined the Horizon Ventures family. At the time, there were questions about the future, about the legacy, about whether this company could hold on to the values that made it strong. I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the audience. Tonight, I'm here to tell you that Carter Builders hasn't just held on to those values, it's building on them. And tonight, I have an announcement. A ripple of curiosity moved through the room. As part of Horizon Ventures' long-term expansion in the Texas market, we've made a decision about our regional headquarters. I glanced toward Rick, who was watching me with sharp attention. Effective immediately, Carter Builders will serve as the official Texas headquarters for Horizon Ventures. This building, this team, this name, Carter, will not just remain. It will grow anchored right here, carrying the same reputation for excellence that's been built over the past 30 years. There was a beat of silence before the applause began, soft at first, then rising into a steady, genuine ovation. I stepped back slightly from the microphone, letting the moment wash over me. Rick was on his feet, clapping, pride written openly across his face. Ethan gave a short nod, a subtle acknowledgement that I'd secured something he hadn't imagined possible. Vanessa's eyes were bright, not just with surprise, but with something closer to gratitude. For years, the Carter name had been a point of tension between us. Tonight, it felt like a bridge. After the applause died down, I closed the speech. This company was built on hard work, vision, and integrity. That doesn't end with a change in ownership. It doesn't end with me. The Carter name will be here, leading projects, building communities, and shaping skylines for decades to come. When I stepped down from the podium, Rick was waiting. He didn't say anything right away, just pulled me into a rare, unguarded hug. "You've done more than I could have asked for," he said quietly. "You've honored the name. You've honored the work." Ethan and Vanessa joined us, each in their own way. Ethan's handshake was firm, his expression respectful in a way it hadn't been 6 months ago. Vanessa's smile was small but real, and in that moment, surrounded by the people who had once underestimated me at every turn, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not vindication, not triumph, belonging. For the first time, the Carter family wasn't divided into those who built the legacy and those who stood on its sidelines. We were standing together on equal ground, moving forward. The deal that had begun as a transaction had become something much bigger. It was a promise, fulfilled. And as the night wound down, I looked out over the ballroom filled with employees, partners, and family. The Carter name was here to stay, and so was I.